In today's episode, we're going to talk about what utilitarianism really means. Simply put, it's this idea that a lawmaker must base law on what does the greatest good for the greatest number. In addition to looking at what utilitarianism really means, we'll also look at whether it's a reasonable basis to make law and what are the problems with this theory. Imagine you're operating a train and the train has no brakes. Up ahead, the track splits left and right. If you turn left, you will hit one construction worker and kill him. But if you turn right, you will hit 5 construction workers and kill them all. Which way would you turn? If you thought you should turn left, then you align with this idea which is called utilitarianism. Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. In this channel, we talk about everything related to the law, including asking some of the more philosophical questions like what is law and why do we follow the law. My name is Mahela and I'm a lawyer by profession, and I've also been teaching law for over 15 years. I've also written a book which tries to answer this question of what is law. You can check it out by clicking on the link in the description below. Anyway, let's talk about utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is essentially a way of thinking about right and wrong. It was first explained by a famous English philosopher named Jeremy Bentham, who lived from 1748 to 1832. He talked about this idea of utility in his book, An Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation, which was published in 1789. Bentham believed that lawmakers should be free to pass any law they want. But he believed that human beings were at the mercy of two masters, pleasure and pain. Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do. He believed that pleasure and pain were the only things that mattered. So if something increased pleasure and reduced suffering, then that's a good thing. He believed that when lawmakers pass law, they should also ask the question, does this law create more pleasure than pain? In other words, they must do what causes the greatest happiness to the greatest number of people. This formula is referred to as the hedonic calculus. It's essentially a happiness calculator. That's where you measure how much pleasure versus pain a particular action will cause. Let's say you have one piece of cake and 3 friends. You could eat the whole thing yourself and be really happy, or share it and make 3 people somewhat happy. According to Bentham, sharing the cake might be better because the total happiness created is greater. So Bentham suggested that laws that are passed in society should follow this utilitarian model. This means when Parliament passes a law, they have to ask the question, does this law cause more happiness or cause more pain? For example, a law that says theft is illegal would cause happiness to almost everyone in the country because their property will be protected from being stolen. So Bentham would say such a law should be passed. But here's where things get tricky. Imagine there's a hospital and there are 5 patients in that hospital waiting for different organ transplants. And outside the hospital, there's a homeless person who is perfectly healthy. Now, the doctors could take the organs from this homeless person and save those 5 lives. Technically, that would cause more happiness than pain. But as logical as this sounds, this application of utilitarianism somehow seems wrong. Similarly, let's say there's a highly conservative society in which homosexuality is considered wrong. So passing a law which criminalizes homosexuality would make a majority of people happy, thus creating the greatest happiness to the greatest number. But this would marginalize the minority of gay people in society. So this law, although it does the greatest good for the greatest number, somehow seems like the wrong thing to do. This example really exposes some of the flaws in the utilitarian thinking. Now, while utilitarianism might sound great in theory, it has some practical problems. Number 1, it focuses too much on the consequences of an action rather than the inherent rightness of the action. Like sacrificing one homeless person to save the life of 5 people, although the consequences of the actions does result in more pleasure than pain, in reality, it just doesn't sound fair or just. Number 2, it ignores individual rights. Just because something is endorsed by a majority doesn't mean that it's okay to hurt a minority. Like in the example of criminalizing homosexuality, it marginalizes a minority group. Number 3, it's hard to measure happiness. How do you compare one person's happiness against another person's sadness? Does one happiness always equal one sadness? Take for example the Colosseum back in the day. 2 gladiators kill each other while tens of thousands of spectators cheer. So technically this creates more happiness over pain. 2 gladiators suffer pain in the form of injury and even death, while thousands gain the pleasure of entertainment. But can you compare this happiness created by entertainment against the pain of death? So while the idea of maximizing pleasure sounds good in theory, in practice it can give some suboptimal results. This is why classical forms of utilitarianism have fallen into disrepute today. So is utilitarianism still useful today? Yes, but with some caution. When making some decisions in some areas, it still makes sense for lawmakers and policymakers to consider doing the greatest good for the greatest number. For example, during the pandemic, lockdowns and vaccine mandates were justified through utilitarian reasoning, protecting many even at the cost of personal liberty. And in areas like environmental law, climate policies use utilitarian cost-benefit frameworks to balance economic impact with collective survival. It also provides a clear mandate to do things that create the greatest happiness amongst the people. As Spock would say, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Of course, this will have to be balanced with fairness and individual rights, because we have to remember that every single person matters, not just the numbers. Meaning, we shouldn't pass laws that stifle the rights of minority groups simply because that's what the majority wants. Like in the example we discussed earlier on laws of criminalizing homosexuality simply because a conservative society doesn't like it. So to wrap up, utilitarianism is this idea created by Jeremy Bentham which asks lawmakers to prioritize doing the greatest good for the greatest number. But of course, using this as a standard does run the risk of marginalizing the rights of individuals and minority groups. So what do you think? Do you think the law needs to focus on doing the greatest good for the greatest number? Let me know in the comments below. Next, check out The Command Theory of Law by John Austin, who was Bentham's student, by clicking on the link on the screen now. And as always, please do consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, live long and prosper.